The rain was falling softly over the small town as everyone gathered for a wedding that nobody believed in. A rich family had already refused to attend, and the bride stood quietly in her simple dress, holding on to hope that felt too heavy for her heart. She was marrying a man who had nothing but kindness in his eyes, and everyone whispered that this day would end in regret. He stood at the end of the aisle wearing an old suit that did not fit him properly, but his eyes never left her face. People judged him before he even spoke because he was poor and had no status in a world that only respected money. But he smiled as if he already knew something that others did not understand. As she walked forward slowly, her hands were shaking and every step felt like a choice between fear and trust. She remembered the life she could have had with wealth and comfort, but it never felt real to her heart. When she finally reached him, something unexpected happened that made the entire crowd fall completely silent. When she reached him, he gently took her hand, and in that moment she felt a strange calm, as if the noise of the world had suddenly disappeared. The guests expected hesitation or regret, but instead the groom looked at her with a quiet confidence that confused everyone in the crowd. Then a luxury car slowly stopped near the gate of the small church, and a man in an expensive suit stepped out, watching the ceremony from a distance. Whispers started again, this time louder because no one recognized the visitor, and yet his presence changed the entire energy of the place. The bride noticed the groom's expression change for the first time, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment to arrive. The unknown man began walking toward them, and every step he took made the crowd more restless and uncertain about what was about to happen. The unknown man stopped near the entrance and looked directly at the groom as if he already knew him from a long-forgotten past. The bride felt her heartbeat rise because nothing about this moment felt normal anymore. The groom did not move, but his eyes carried a calmness that no one in the crowd understood. It was as if he had been waiting for this interruption since the beginning of the ceremony. The man in the expensive suit slowly walked closer, and the crowd silently stepped aside without even realizing it. Every step he took carried weight, like a decision that could change everything. The bride looked at the groom, searching for an answer, but he only gave her a gentle, reassuring look. That look told her to stay calm even though everything around them was becoming uncertain. The man finally stopped in front of them and studied the bride for a long moment. Then he spoke to the groom in a low voice that only the front row could barely hear. The groom nodded once, as if accepting something important. The bride felt a strange shift in the air, as though a hidden truth was about to surface. The unknown man turned toward the crowd and raised his hand slightly, signaling silence. No one knew who he was, but everyone obeyed without question. He began walking around the couple, slowly observing them as if confirming a decision in his mind. The bride felt exposed under his gaze, but the groom gently held her hand tighter. The man finally spoke again, and this time his voice carried through the entire place. He said the groom was not who everyone believed him to be. A wave of confusion passed through the crowd, and murmurs started spreading quickly. The bride felt her world tilt slightly as she tried to understand what was happening. The groom closed his eyes for a moment, as if preparing for something he had delayed for too long. Then he opened them and looked at the bride with honesty that surprised her. He told her softly that he had never been truly poor. Those words landed like a shock in the silent air. The bride stepped back slightly, trying to process what she had just heard. Her mind refused to connect the image of the simple man she knew with the words being spoken now. The unknown man nodded, as if confirming the truth. He explained that the groom had chosen to live a hidden life away from wealth and power. The crowd gasped, but still no one moved from their place. The bride looked at the groom again as memories of their time together flashed in her mind. She remembered how he never spoke about money. How he always helped others without expecting anything in return. How peaceful he seemed even in the hardest moments. Now everything started to look different in a new, confusing light. She wanted to understand, but her emotions were overwhelmed. The groom finally spoke again, and this time his voice was steady but emotional. He said he wanted someone who would choose him without knowing his truth. The bride felt her eyes fill with tears as she listened. She realized that every moment leading to this day had been a test she never knew she was part of. The unknown man stepped back slightly, giving them space. He seemed satisfied as if something had been completed successfully. The groom continued saying he never wanted pity or attraction based on wealth. He wanted real love that could survive any truth. The bride lowered her gaze as she struggled with everything she was hearing. Her heart was torn between shock and understanding. The crowd slowly began to realize that this wedding was not ordinary at all. It was something far deeper than anyone had expected. The groom gently lifted her hand again, asking her to stay with him in this moment. His eyes were not demanding but full of quiet hope. The bride looked at him and felt her emotions fighting inside her. She had come believing she was marrying a poor man, but now she stood in front of a truth she never imagined. The unknown man finally turned to leave, but before doing so he said one last thing. He said the groom had finally found what he was searching for. Then he walked away, leaving behind more questions than answers. The bride stood still, unable to move, as silence filled the entire place again. The groom waited patiently, not forcing her to decide anything. The rain outside began falling more heavily, as if reflecting the storm inside her heart. She realized that everything she thought she knew had changed in a single moment. The groom softly told her that she was free to leave if she wanted. His voice carried no fear, only acceptance. Those words broke something inside her, because she realized he was giving her the same choice he had given himself. A choice to be loved for truth, not illusion. She looked at him for a long time, trying to read his soul rather than his story. And in that silence something inside her began to shift. She remembered why she had agreed to this marriage in the first place. Not for wealth, not for status, but for the peace she felt with him. That peace had not disappeared even after the truth was revealed. It was still there, quietly waiting beneath all the confusion. The bride slowly stepped closer again. The crowd held its breath as she made her decision without saying a word. The groom watched her carefully, as if afraid to hope. But she gently placed her hand back in his. A soft silence filled the place as the moment settled into something real. No wealth, no secrets, no expectations, only a choice made from the heart. And in that moment the wedding did not end. It began. The bride's hand resting in his changed everything in that silent hall. It was not a dramatic moment anymore, but something deeper that even the watching crowd could feel without understanding it. The groom slowly exhaled, as if he had been holding his breath for years, and finally allowed himself to believe in the present moment. The unknown man who had revealed the truth had already disappeared into the distance, leaving behind only unanswered questions. Outside the rain softened again, turning into a calm, steady rhythm, as if nature itself had accepted the decision made inside. The bride looked at the groom, and for the first time since the revelation her eyes were no longer confused but thoughtful. She whispered that she needed to understand everything, not because she doubted him but because the truth had shaken her world. The groom nodded without hesitation, as if he had been prepared for this conversation all along. He gently guided her away from the crowd toward a quiet corner inside the small church where no one could interrupt them. The guests remained frozen, unsure whether they were witnessing a wedding or something far more complex unfolding in front of them. The bride sat down slowly, still trying to process the layers of truth she had just discovered. The groom stood beside her for a moment before sitting down at a respectful distance, giving her space to breathe. He began speaking again, but this time his voice was softer and more personal. He told her that his life before meeting her was never truly about poverty or wealth, but about escaping expectations. He explained that he had grown up surrounded by luxury but felt trapped in a world where everyone valued him only for what he owned. So he left that life behind, not out of anger but out of a need to find something real. The bride listened carefully, and every word slowly started reshaping how she saw him. She realized that the man sitting beside her had not been hiding wealth but hiding pain. He told her that when he met her he did not want to impress her with money or status. He wanted to see if she could see him without any filters of the world. That was why he chose a simple life when he first approached her. It was not a trick but a search for truth in a world full of illusions. The bride felt her heart tighten because she understood the risk he had taken. He had allowed himself to be seen as nothing just to find someone who could love him for who he was. She looked down at her hands, still processing the weight of everything he had shared. For a moment there was silence between them again, but the silence felt different now. It was not confusion anymore but reflection. The groom finally asked her gently if she felt betrayed. His question was honest and vulnerable, not defensive. The bride took a long breath before answering because she knew her words mattered more than anything now. She said she did not feel betrayed but overwhelmed. Overwhelmed by how deeply everything had been planned around honesty rather than deception. Overwhelmed by the fact that love had been tested before it was even fully born. The groom looked at her quietly as if those words gave him more relief than he expected. He admitted that he had feared losing her the moment the truth came out. But seeing her still sitting beside him gave him a kind of peace he had never experienced before. Outside the hall the guests slowly began to leave, still talking in whispers about what they had witnessed. Some called it strange, others called it impossible, but none of them could deny it was unforgettable. Inside, the bride and groom remained seated as the world around them slowly faded into background noise. The wedding was no longer about a ceremony or expectations. It had turned into something rare. A moment where truth and choice existed side by side without forcing each other. The groom finally stood and extended his hand again, not as a request but as an invitation. The bride looked at it for a long moment. Then she slowly stood up and placed her hand in his once more. Not because everything was clear, but because she chose to walk forward even in uncertainty. Way no one there would ever forget. The moment she placed her hand in his again felt different from before. It was no longer confusion or shock guiding her actions but a quiet willingness to understand what lay ahead. The groom did not speak immediately. He simply held her hand as if afraid that even a single word might break the fragile peace between them. Outside the church the rain had almost stopped and soft light began breaking through the clouds. It created a strange calm contrast with everything that had just happened inside. The bride looked at him and asked one simple question. "Why did you choose me?" The question hung in the air longer than expected because it carried more weight than it sounded like. The groom slowly turned toward her and for the first time there was no hesitation in his eyes. He told her that it was not about choosing her randomly but about recognizing something in her he had never found anywhere else. He said that when he first saw her she was not impressed by him nor distracted by what he had. She treated him like a person, not a possibility. That small difference had changed everything for him. The bride listened carefully, trying to remember those early moments. She recalled how natural it felt to talk to him even when she knew nothing about his life. The groom continued saying that most people around him always tried to reach his world. But she never tried to climb into anything, she simply stood where she was with honesty. That honesty was what he had been searching for all along. The bride lowered her gaze again, feeling a strange mix of emotions. She was beginning to understand that the truth was not just about him but also about her own choices. She asked him softly if everything about their meeting was planned. The groom shook his head immediately. He said their meeting was real but he had only hidden who he truly was afterward to see if what they had was strong enough to survive truth. The bride felt a slight ache in her chest because she realized how fragile human trust can be when it is tested without warning. But at the same time she also felt something unexpected growing inside her. Respect. Respect for the honesty even if it came in a complicated form. The groom then told her that he never wanted control over her decision. Even now she could walk away and he would not stop her. Those words created another silence between them. The bride looked around the nearly empty church. Everything felt different now. Not broken but transformed. She realized that life was not giving her a perfect story but a real one. One where love was not based on certainty but on choice made repeatedly even after truth is revealed. She slowly took a step closer to him again. The groom watched her without moving as if afraid to interrupt her thoughts. Then she spoke quietly, saying that she did not know what the future would look like. But she also did not want to run away from something just because it was complicated. The groom's expression softened but he still said nothing. The bride continued, saying that trust would take time to rebuild fully. but she was willing to try if he was willing to be honest from this point forward without any more hidden truths. The groom nodded once slowly with full acceptance. For the first time since the ceremony began there was no tension in the air. Only understanding that was still forming. Outside the church the last drops of rain fell from the roof and the world looked fresh as if washed clean. Inside the bride gently adjusted her dress and looked at him with a faint uncertain smile. She said, maybe this is how real beginnings look. Not perfect. Not clear. But honest enough to continue. The groom smiled back quietly and together they walked toward the exit of the church side by side. The guests who were still outside watched them in silence as they stepped into the softened light of the afternoon. And in that moment the wedding no longer felt like a mystery or a shock. It felt like they stepped outside the church and the cool air felt different as if the world itself had reset after everything that happened inside. The crowd that had gathered earlier was still there but no one spoke because they could sense that something important had already been decided. The bride stood beside the groom looking at the quiet road ahead where rainwater slowly moved along the edges of the ground. She realized that nothing around her had actually changed but everything inside her had shifted completely. The groom gently released her hand for a moment and looked at her with calm sincerity. He told her that no matter what comes next he will never hide the truth again because he finally understood what it costs. The bride nodded slowly not because she had all the answers but because she had accepted that not all answers come before a decision. She asked him softly where they go from here. The groom looked ahead for a moment then back at her and said that they build something real step by step without pretending or rushing. Not a perfect life but an honest one. The bride took a deep breath as the last clouds began to move away and sunlight touched the ground for the first time that day. It felt like a quiet approval from the world around them. She turned slightly toward him and said that love should not feel like a test again. If they were going to continue it had to feel like a choice made every day, not a mystery to be solved. The groom agreed without hesitation. For a moment they both stood in silence just watching the road ahead as people slowly began to leave and life started returning to normal around them. But nothing about them felt ordinary anymore. The bride finally stepped closer and rested her head lightly against his shoulder. It was not a dramatic ending or a perfect promise. It was simply acceptance of uncertainty with trust still alive inside it. The groom gently placed his hand around her and they stood together as the sound of the fading rain disappeared completely. Behind them the church remained quiet, holding the memory of everything that had unfolded inside it. But ahead of them was something unwritten and open. And as they walked away together side by side, the story did not end in answers. It ended in a beginning that neither of them fully understood. But both were finally ready to live. A beginning of a story that had finally chosen truth over illusion.